Good evening. I'm Judy Woodruff on the NewsHour tonight. State of emergency. Texas continues to struggle in the wake of devastating winter storms as millions remain without drinking water and power is slowly restored. Then, getting the vaccine. Public health officials try to rebuild trust among indigenous Americans as the COVID inoculation campaign accelerates.
We recognize as Native physicians the degree of distrust in our communities. However, we are dying at much higher numbers. So in order to continue to protect our communities, we have to take this vaccine up.
And it's Friday. David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart consider Republican infighting, the legacy of Rush Limbaugh, and President Biden's first month in office. All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
moving our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
Consumer Cellular, Johnson & Johnson.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
The lights are back on in much of Texas tonight, but for millions, the water isn't working. It is the latest crisis in a grinding week of winter storms that have now claimed at least 70 lives. We turn again to Stephanie Side to begin our coverage.
After long days in the dark, the power has largely been restored in communities across Texas that endured bitter cold.
I don't know when it's going to go off again. If it'll go off, I don't know, so... immediately when the lights came on, I hurry up and made a pot of shrimp gumbo and warmed up.
State grid operators said today their system is finally back to normal operations, nearly a week after some 4 million customers lost power. That number had fallen more than 90% by this evening. But there was no end in sight for a debilitating water crisis. Pipes that burst in the frigid temperatures have led to a shortage. 14 million people have been affected, many of whom are now having to boil their water before they consume it.
The temperature in the house was 33 degrees, and now the power's back on, so it's warm, but we don't have any water. So I'm here to get water. I've been to several different stores, and no one has water.
Houston's Del Mar Stadium hosted a bottled water drive-through distribution today.
I'm going to sit here until, I have no choice. All the stores in my area are out of water.
24-year-old Trent Helt echoed that experience, speaking to us from Arlington outside Dallas. A main pipe burst has cut off water to his residence since Monday.
It's been interesting to say the least. We haven't been able to shower or bathe yet. We've had to buy multiple packs of water to either wash dishes or to bathe with. To flush the toilets, we were scooping the snow up and we were boiling it to melt it down. And that's how we would flush the toilets at our house.
You're probably
yes, ma'am.
Really tired of the sponge baths.
Most definitely. I cannot wait to take an actual shower.
Meanwhile, President Biden promised a major disaster declaration for Texas to expedite much-needed resources, and he plans to visit the storm-ravaged state soon.
If, in fact, it's concluded that I can do it without creating a burden for the folks on the ground while they're dealing with this crisis, I plan on going. But we'll know that. We'll make that decision probably the beginning of next week.
As calls for accountability grow louder, Bill Magnus, the president of ERCOT, which manages the state's power grid, said today his agency is open to new ideas.
We're subject to policymakers and leaders and, how they want us to operate. And if they're seeing that there's something that's really got to change from, looking at the totality of what we did, we'll certainly try to change it or take any other action we're told to do to manage the issues that they're seeing.
Hey, ho, ho! Ted Cruz has got to go!
Texas Senator Ted Cruz also faced calls for accountability. Protesters gathered outside his Houston home after it was revealed he'd flown to Cancun as the state was reeling from the storm. He flew back Thursday.
It was obviously a mistake, and in hindsight, I wouldn't have done it. I was trying to be a dad.
Elsewhere across the South, water issues are also plaguing other states that were hit by wintry weather. In Mississippi, nearly all of the 161,000 people in the city of Jackson were without water today. And in Tennessee, the Memphis International Airport was forced to cancel all of its flights because of low water pressure. We head back to Texas now, where the water outages are severely impacting operations at hospitals already stressed by the pandemic. Joining me now is Dr. Esmael Porsa, President and CEO of Harris Health System in the Houston area. Many of its patients are uninsured and underserved. Dr. Porsa, thank you for joining us on the News Hour. So I understand that one of your hospitals this week was so desperate for water, the fire department had to be called, where they then distributed water directly from a hydrant. What happened and how are things now?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. And I want to start, as always, by thanking all the healthcare providers and nurses and everybody else who's taking care of our patients in our hospitals. You're correct. A couple of nights ago, around 1 o'clock in the morning, I was notified that the water pressure inside of our water towers that supplies water to the hospital, in addition to our HVAC system that controls the humidity and the temperature of our hospital, was rapidly running out of water. It was a desperate situation. I was told that within a few hours, if it could not replenish the water to our water tower, that we would have to actually evacuate the patients out of the hospital. So I was able to call the city. The city was great in responding very quickly. They sent a fire truck to the hospital. They were able to, as you mentioned, able to connect the fire hydrant using a hose to a water tower and slowly bring the water up. The water hydrant, unfortunately, was facing the same issue as the rest of the systems here in Houston, Texas. The water pressure was extremely low, but it was enough to buy us time so that during the day we were able to actually purchase several thousands of gallons of water that was delivered to us through trucks to maintain our operations. And as the temperatures rose and as the water pressures improved, we were able to actually maintain. We are holding steady right now. The issue is no longer the water. The issue is the people coming to our emergency rooms, ours, in addition to other hospitals in this area, because urgent care clinics are shut down. The main issue right now is our dialysis patients. We having historic number of dialysis patients coming to our emergency room seeking treatment because private dialysis centers have been closed for the entire week.
So even before this week, hospitals were already dealing with a surge of COVID patients in many cases. Are you at capacity at this point? Are you having to turn away any of these dialysis patients coming in or anyone else?
Well, we are at capacity. We have been at capacity. As you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, we are the safety net hospital for Harris County, the largest county, the most populous county in Texas. So we have been at capacity almost from the beginning of the pandemic. We've continued to be at capacity. The situation has not gotten any better. What has happened actually since the start of last week or this week is that the patients who are ready to be discharged can be discharged home because they also lack power and water. So we have our inpatient units getting backed up even more than what they have been. They have been more than 100% capacity for a few days now. But to your question about turning people away, we do not turn anybody away. We have not had to turn anybody away. We have more than 20 or 30 now patients waiting for dialysis treatment in our emergency rooms. Unfortunately, we are only able to provide so many services. As you may know, dialysis is not a quick thing. It takes at least 4 hours for each treatment, and we only have so many machines. And to make the matter even more dire is the staffing. Our staff are not immune to everything else going on in the community. So they have the same issue with loss of water, loss of electricity, busted pipes, damaged ceilings. So it's all adding up to become the perfect storm in an already really bad situation.
Well, Dr. Porsa, we certainly are glad that you have at least the water you need for right now and that the temperatures are warming up. We wish you the best, to you and your staff. Dr. Esmail Porsa, President and CEO of the Harris Health System, joining us from near Houston. Thank you.
Thank you.
In the day's other news, the White House confirmed that the Arctic storm has set back COVID vaccine shipments. Extreme conditions delayed delivery of 6 million doses and closed vaccination sites in some places. But in a virtual briefing, presidential advisor Andy Slavitt said he is confident of catching up.
Now, as weather conditions improve, we're already working to clear this backlog. 1.4 million doses are already in transit today, and we anticipate that all the backlog doses will be delivered within the next week, with most being delivered within the next several days.
President Biden toured a Pfizer vaccine manufacturing facility today in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Earlier, he pledged a total of $4 billion to help buy vaccines for poor countries. The United States is once again part of the Paris Climate Accord. That became official today, following an executive order by President Biden. His administration has promised to set a new target for cutting greenhouse gas emissions. President Trump took the U.S. out of the Paris Accord last fall. In another break with Trump policy, the U.S. has begun allowing in the first of thousands of asylum seekers from Mexico. They had been waiting there for months or even years while their cases are decided. The policy change affects some 25,000 migrants. Initially, a few hundred a day are being processed. President Biden appealed to the world's democracies today to tackle new challenges or risk becoming relics. He addressed the Munich Security Conference via video link and called for action on economic troubles and the pandemic. He also pledged a new American approach to NATO in his first major global appearance since taking office.
I know the past few years have strained and tested our transatlantic relationship. But the United States is determined to re-engage with Europe, to consult with you, to earn back our position of trusted leadership.
The president charged that Russia is working to undermine NATO and that China is using coercion and economic abuses to gain dominance. The U.S. Justice Department is alleging a broader conspiracy among the far-right Oath Keepers militia in the storming of the U.S. Capitol. 6 more people were indicted today. They allegedly plotted to use military-style tactics in a bid to block Congress from certifying President Biden's election. The U.S. Capitol Police Force has suspended 6 officers in the wake of the Capitol attack. Today's announcement says that they are among 35 officers being investigated for how they responded to the assault by extremist Trump supporters. Social media videos appear to show some officers escorting rioters into the Capitol. Ride-sharing giant Uber has lost a major court fight in Britain. The country's Supreme Court ruled today that Uber drivers are in fact workers entitled to minimum wage and benefits rather than independent contractors. Last year, Uber defeated an attempt in California to treat drivers as full-fledged employees. And on Wall Street today, stocks barely budged. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained just 1 point to close at 31,494. The Nasdaq rose 9 points, and the S&P 500 lost 7. Still to come on the NewsHour, health officials try to rebuild trust of vaccines among indigenous Americans. The U.S. military grapples with a rising epidemic of sexual assault within its ranks. David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart on Republican divides and President Biden's first month in office, plus much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Native Americans have been among the hardest hit by COVID-19, but a history of medical mistreatment led some indigenous leaders to brace for challenges in vaccinating their communities. Special correspondent Fred DeSam Lazaro reports on those efforts.
On a frigid morning in Minneapolis, a sign of progress in the fight against COVID-19. Inside a former Dollar Tree store, residents waited for doses of the Moderna coronavirus vaccine.
Friday for your second dose.
The effort was run by the Native American Community Clinic, which serves thousands of indigenous people in the area.
Although native lands are predominantly in very remote settings, the majority of native peoples in the United States actually lives in cities. This South Minneapolis neighborhood has one of the densest urban native populations, and there's a concerted effort to vaccinate the elderly.
People like 67-year-old Elsie Budrow, an enrolled member of the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe. She spent most of her life going back and forth between Minneapolis and the reservation in northern Minnesota. That is, until the pandemic hit.
Everybody's kind of keeping to themselves, which is very hard because in the Native community, you share a lot with your family, and that hasn't been able to happen.
So when Budrow found out she could get the vaccine, she leapt at the opportunity.
I'm, like everybody else, kind of scared of it, but my own common sense tells me that it's safe to get it and it's going to help in the pandemic.
Nationwide, indigenous people have experienced the highest death rate from COVID-19, nearly twice the rate of white Americans. That's partly because Native people have higher incidence of diabetes, heart disease, and asthma, conditions related to poverty that can exacerbate a coronavirus infection. Anthony Stately is the executive director of the Native American Community Clinic, or NAC.
Establishing herd immunity, getting 70 to 80% of our population vaccinated is going to be really, really important. Many communities are losing their elders. Those are the people that hold the knowledge of our culture and our language, things that are really important to us, that are as important to our health and well-being as is medicine, as is food, as is water, and all those other things.
Stately has tried to spread the word about the vaccine on a Native American radio show.
The difference between taking the vaccine and not taking the vaccine at all is that, if you take the vaccine, you have some percentage of chance of being immune to it or to have some protection.
It's personal for Stately, who was hospitalized with COVID.
The first night I got there, I just cried because it sort of hit me like a ton of bricks that I had to say goodbye to my children. I didn't know if I was going to get home.
At the end of December, NAC held a small ceremony where it vaccinated its first group of community elders, hoping to infuse the medicine with good spirit and protect their people. But for Stately, the vaccination push comes with a challenge.
Native people, we have this long history of not being treated very well by the medical establishment and the research community, and so I expected that elder people would be ambivalent about accepting the vaccine.
That describes Stately's cousin Roxanne Flamond, who stopped by recently for a visit.
I'm going to Phoenix.
You are? Dang, in the middle of a pandemic, no less. How are you going to pull that off?
I'm going to wear 2 masks and a shield.
So you don't think you might want to take the vaccine before you go?
Okay,
or
no, that's not going to happen.
Flamande, who's 67 and has underlying health conditions, is concerned about having an allergic reaction to the shot, a side effect seen in a relatively small number of cases with the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines.
In the beginning, I had conspiracy theories, and I said, I'm going to wait until everybody to see what everybody else does. And if they're dropping like flies, I'm not getting it, But also the fact that, our historically, the government has not really treated our people,
That's true.
fairly.
That's true.
In the 1970s, the Federal Indian Health Service sterilized thousands of indigenous women without their permission or after coercing them. Roxanne Flamande says she was one of those women.
I was coerced in signing papers to be sterilized. And I didn't know. I was 19. I believed what the doctor said.
The history also includes the abuse of Native Americans in scientific research, and it dates back all the way to the 1700s when British colonizers gave tribes blankets contaminated with smallpox. So when Flamande first heard about the COVID vaccines,
I was like, well, is this another smallpox-infested blanket just in a different form?
for providers in indigenous communities, a big task now is convincing patients that the government's response this time is appropriate. Dr. Mary Owen is president of the Association of American Indian Physicians.
We recognize as Native physicians the degree of distrust in our communities, and we recognize the reasons for most of us having lived in and continuing to work in our communities. However, it is so important that people recognize that we are dying at much higher numbers, and the government is actually getting this one right by getting us the vaccine as they should be. So in order to continue to protect our communities that are dying, our community members who are dying at disproportionate amounts, we have to take this vaccine up.
The effort from Owen and others may be working. A recent survey by the Urban Indian Health Institute found 75% of American Indians and Alaska Natives are willing to get the vaccine. Encouraging as that acceptance is, the challenge, as in so many other communities, will continue to be getting enough vaccine and getting it across the vast, varied landscape of Indian country. Meantime, Anthony Stately was relieved to learn that, by the end of their short meeting, his cousin was considering taking a shot, but Roxanne Flamande insisted she was going to wait at least a few more weeks. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Fred DeSam-Lazaro in Minneapolis.
Fred's reporting is a partnership with the Undertold Stories Project at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. A video posted by a female Marine about sexual assault in the military rocketed across the internet and into the Pentagon press briefing room today. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin promised to take additional steps to stop such violence. But as Nick Schifrin reports, sexual assault in the military continues to rise, and individual families continue to be ripped apart.
When Asia Graham graduated from high school in 2019, she hoped the military would give her and her mother, Nicole, a better life.
She wanted to go in the military, make me her dependent, and have me staying with her for the rest of my life.
Anthony Graham is Asia's brother.
Even though my mom was a mom, my sister tried to act like a mom.
Where do you think that sense of responsibility in her came from?
We just raised a wonderful girl.
That girl became a woman in uniform. In December 2019, she arrived at Fort Bliss in Texas, an 18-year-old soldier.
She was a very, very proud soldier. In her basic trainings, First Sergeant loved her and praised her.
But she left the military draped in a flag. She'd been found dead on New Year's Eve 2020 in her barracks at age 19. An initial Army press release said, "The Iron Eagle team is deeply saddened by the loss of our friend and teammate." But a second statement 3 days later, after a local news report, revealed a darker time in uniform. Graham reported she'd been raped by a fellow member of her unit in December 2019. The Army said it launched a criminal investigation, separated her from her alleged attacker, and offered and encouraged medical help. In Nicole's home, Nicole and Anthony Graham keep a photographic shrine, the happy daughter of a white mother and black veteran, the smiling soldier, the confident girl, confidence that they say the Army extinguished.
That same glow that she had about the military, that same happiness wasn't there.
And they say what the Army claimed to have done to protect her isn't true, beginning with when she first approached her commanders.
She got raped by a fellow soldier in December. She reported it in February. She was told to shut up. And the rapist was in her barracks, in her company, and she had to see him.
Asia Graham's own words also suggest the Army didn't do what it claimed. In a message obtained by PBS NewsHour that she sent to a friend 4 days before she died, she wrote, "I told my non-commissioned officer, and he didn't take it that serious." She writes she then told a female sergeant who admitted she didn't speak up, and a similar situation happened to her when she first got here too. Graham told others who were more senior, but all they cared about was the Army doctrine and cover up themselves. "I really was asking for help and therapy. I just feel mistreated." Graham moved in with her brother off base to get away from her alleged attacker. The siblings had always been close. Anthony saw his sister's descent. She started drinking and taking pills and became self-destructive. She got a DUI. She died of an overdose. But in counseling, Anthony says she was told not to tell anyone anything.
They heard her story, and then right afterwards, they're like, all right, we just need you to shut up about this. Don't talk about it to nobody. Don't tell nobody about it. We're going to take care of it.
Last month, Fort Bliss charged Private First Class Christian Alvarado with raping Asia Graham in December 2019, and 5 months later, raping another woman, and 3 months after that, sexually assaulting a third woman. Per Army regulations, he's still on base, on active duty, and free.
Is what happened to Asia Graham typical?
Yes. Who's responsible for the soldiers' well-being? It's the chain of command. They didn't listen, and in this case, the survivor is dead.
Camilla Vance Shadley and her husband, retired Major General Robert Shadley, are with Never Alone Advocacy, a nonprofit that helps military victims of sexual assault. Over the past decade, the number of reported victims has doubled, from 3,327 in 2010 to 7,825 in 2019. But the actual number of sexual assaults, including those not reported, is estimated to be 20,000. Last year, an independent investigation found a permissive environment for sexual assault at Fort Hood and a lack of knowledge among commanders on when and how to report sexual assaults. At Fort Bliss, Graham faced the same challenges.
They actually are allowing the commands to make choices as to what rules they will follow, they won't, and Asia's the perfect one. 4 people knew that she had complained.
It is not the chain of commands choice to whether to believe or not. Their responsibility is to report it to trained investigators to look into it to get the ground truth.
But Shadley says the buck doesn't stop with Graham's unit.
The commander at Fort Bliss should be held accountable in order to send a signal to the command and to all the other division commanders, you better get involved.
Shadley knows this problem.
We as leaders have a responsibility to take care of our soldiers, and it breaks your heart when we don't.
In 1996, he commanded the Army's Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland when it became known that drill sergeants had been preying on young female trainees.
I have been told by hundreds, if not thousands, of soldiers that they don't trust their chain of command. This is a force readiness issue. I predict a young leader is going to stand up on the battlefield and say, "Follow me," and the soldiers are going to say, "I don't think so."
In a statement to PBS NewsHour, Fort Bliss says it's investigating when Graham originally reported to her commanders and, quote, if indeed those leaders took no actions, then failure to act would be unacceptable. But other service members say their leaders also take no action.
I've dedicated my life to the military.
In a viral TikTok video, a Marine says her commanding general allowed her perpetrator to stay in the service.
And this is exactly why females in the military kill themselves. This is exactly why nobody takes us seriously.
Today, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin admitted the military has not effectively dealt with sexual assault.
We've been working at this for a long time, in earnest, but we haven't gotten it right. I found the video deeply disturbing. I'm going to ask that her chain of command make sure that someone is looking out after her needs.
Last year, candidate Biden promised to tackle sexual assault in the military. At a fundraiser, he said commanders should be removed from sexual assault reporting and prosecution decisions.
We have to change the culture of abuse in this country, especially in armed services. I'd immediately appoint a commission of current and former military leaders, sexual assault survivors, and their advocates and sexual assault experts, and give them 90 days to make concrete recommendations to me, including on prosecution decisions.
But Shadley warns the military may not follow through, and so he urges President Biden to demand results.
I believe the president should stick to his word and say, I want you to fix it. If the current leadership isn't going to do it, get somebody in there who will.
Back in Nicole Graham's home, what was once pride and hope in Asia's uniform is now regret that she ever allowed her daughter to put it on.
I really beat myself up that I signed the paperwork for her to go. When they recruit the kids, they say it's a family. What kind of family lets people get raped and not taking care of the rapist? I wish I never would have signed the paper.
They are victims of a plague that the military has known about for decades, but never cured. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
And now we turn to the analysis of Brooks and Capehart. That is New York Times columnist David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart, columnist for the Washington Post. So good to see both of you on this Friday night. It's the first time we've seen you since the impeachment trial last week ended last Saturday. President Trump. Jonathan, it seems almost every day this past week, though, we've been hearing from different Republican state officials about how they were going to punish or censure Republican senators who voted to convict, whether it was Senator Cassidy in Louisiana, Senator Toomey in Pennsylvania. There's talk that he will be censured. How deep is the animosity toward these lawmakers who voted against former President Trump?
I think the animosity is deep, very deep. I mean, these state party chairs, one might be responding in their own capacity, these state parties in their own capacity, but they are a reflection of the Republican Party base. You know, Judy, when I interviewed former RNC chairman Michael Steele back in August of 2016, and I talked to him about the candidacy then of Donald Trump running for president, being the nominee.